Company to being in a company that was me and only me. I had a team around me that were extremely trustworthy, and we delivered things as a team. That turned into me and a responsibility on me to get stuff done. I didn't have my manager saying, is that done? I didn't have my manager saying, how are we going to fix this problem? I didn't have anybody doing things for me that needed to get done by a certain deadline. I had to do everything myself. And this had a very big impact, I think, on how Metalman developed. I really missed that in a very productive sort of way. I kind of floundered a lot without having that structure around me that helped deliver things. But equally, it gave me the freedom to go, you know what, I don't have to sit on a conference call at 5 o'clock on a Thursday evening anymore to pretend I'm interested in something that other people are doing, but which doesn't impact me as an individual or the team that I'm working in. So there were pros and cons, definitely, from moving away from that to going and doing what we were doing. So what I tried to do initially, and in retrospect, some of it worked really well and some of it didn't, was fit a lot of that process that I was used to around a company of one person. So as you can imagine, there was mixed success with that. I tried to give myself goals and hold myself accountable to them. Worked in some ways, it didn't work in other ways, because as I very quickly learned, listening to, or rather expecting other small business owners that I was interacting with to deliver things that they told me they were going to deliver just didn't work in the real world the way it worked in the corporate environment. Somebody would say that they'd do something for me on Tuesday, and I would go back to them on Tuesday and say, is that done? And they'd go, no. And there was no, well, we couldn't because this, and it'll be done by 9 o'clock tomorrow. There was just, no, I didn't get to it, and it won't be done probably this week. It might be done next week, but I'm not going to commit to it. Frustrated the living daylights out of me initially, because I just wasn't used to it. And then before long, I found myself being that person. And I couldn't believe it. My lovely, structured and diligent approach to work had turned into me going, I'm really sorry, I know I said I'd do that for you today, but I'm not going to be able to get to it, and this is going to be this and the other going to happen, and it's going to be like next week before I can do it, I'm sorry. And it really took the wind out of my sails. So as a small brewery trying to get off the ground, and we were brewing our beer in Tipperary at this point while we were trying to build out the brewery in Waterford, and it was mostly just me. I was juggling so much and stretched so far that I'm actually looking back on it going, it's amazing we got anything done. But we got there in the end. The beer got brewed in Tipperary. We built out the brewery in Waterford, and April last year we started producing our beer in our own brewery in Waterford, which was obviously a massive milestone. So I suppose we were 6 months behind schedule, the schedule that I had laid out in my mind, which, looking back on it, I probably needed a team of about 3 people to meet if I was ever going to come anywhere close to it. But we got there, and we started brewing beer, and it was really scary because there was nobody there saying, yes, you're doing it right, or this isn't quite how we want it, you should refine this process, you should make this beer hoppier, you should make this beer less hoppy, you should do it this way to make sure you've got a more consistent product. And we didn't really have that guidance. All we could really do was sort of wing it. But what really worked then was the processes, I suppose, from coming from a structured environment meant that we wrote stuff down and we said, this is how we do it. We hired our first person. He said, how do we do this? I was like, I better write that down. This is how we do it. And I suppose I tried to apply that across everything we do, so that there's 4 of us working in the brewery now. For me, it's really important that everybody knows how to do a bit of everything, if not all about how to do everything, so that and that we're all doing it the same way, so that there's a consistent product every time. We've got beer that comes out this week. It really should taste the same as the beer that came out last week and the beer that comes out next week. As if any of you have ever homebrewed, you probably understand the number of variables involved in making a beer, which are sometimes really hard to control, even like on a commercial basis, because we're so small. So one of the things that we try and make sure we do is take note of everything we're doing, reproduce it as best we can, or if we think that something's going wrong, go back and look at the notes that we've got and go, why do we think that was different? How can we make it better? So if any of you drink our beer, hopefully you will have some feedback for us on whether it is as consistent as we would like to think it is. It probably isn't, frankly, because we're such a small brewery. It is difficult, but that's the kind of stuff that we focus on. It's like, how do we get the hops the same each time? Because, you know, they're an agricultural product. They come from different places, different crops, different farms, processed by different pelletizers. How do we make sure that it tastes the same in our beer every time? It isn't always gonna, but it's as long as we produce a high quality product, then variations in our raw materials is not something that we can really do an awful lot about. So we try and commit to having the highest quality product that we can out there, so that when people order a Metalman beer, they have a certain expectation that it's going to taste like a good beer. It might taste exactly like the one last week, but hopefully it tastes like a good beer. So a lot of challenges from that point of view. I suppose other things to maybe that really struck me when I left a desk job was I was on my feet a lot. That was a bit of a shock. I went from somebody who sat at a desk for, I suppose, maybe 10 hours a day to somebody who was lucky if they got to sit at their desk for 1 hour a day. And if I wasn't sitting at my desk for longer than that, I was falling behind on stuff. So it was difficult to try and, you know, prioritize. Do I go dig out the mash tun, or do I sit down and issue a whole load of invoices? It's kind of hard to juggle sometimes. But what I also ended up doing was sitting in my van a lot, which was a real eye-opener for me. I never really used to have to drive very far when I lived in Dublin, here or there at weekends, but I didn't have to commute anywhere. So sitting in a van for, I guess, upwards of maybe 8 hours a week kind of crystallizes your thought a little bit. It gives you time for a bit of thinking. And that's something that I found I never got when I worked in a corporate environment. I never got time to sit back and think, right, now I've got time and all I'm doing is concentrating on the motorway. I can think about stuff that's fun to think about. Not stuff that I have to think about, but stuff that's fun to think about. And that was a really great thing, I think, early on that happened to me, which was like, I got to wonder, what am I doing with Metalman? Where do I want it to be? What do I want our philosophy to be? Because you can kind of get taken along early on in everything that's going on and not really have that time to think back, you know, to just step back, get a little bit of perspective and wonder about where it's going. And I think the more people you have on board, the more that you can engender what it is that you want the company philosophy to be, the more it feels like a company, and the better sort of, I suppose, public personality you have as a business. And that's really important to us, to make sure that, you know, as I said, when a Metalman beer is out there, we hope that the beers that are out there are always high quality. They mightn't be to everyone's taste. We try and do something different every month. It isn't always going to be a beer that everybody likes. We think that's okay, because it would be really boring if everybody liked the same kind of beer. And I think there's been enough damage done on the bars of Ireland at this stage to encourage people to drink the black one or the yellow one, or maybe the red one if you're really far out there. But, you know, the more variety that we can try and introduce, the better it is. And it's a huge amount of fun sitting down every month or every 2 weeks sometimes and going, let's make something different. What will we do? And we try and get a little, you know, a little bit of talk going in the brewery. What would we like to make? What have we got that we can have a bit of fun with? What sort of hops will we use? What kind of style do we want? What is going to make this a beer from Metalman that's that little bit different, rather than something else that we've already made or something that somebody else is making? So we do try and be as uncorporate as we can in that respect, I suppose, and be kind of agile and try and make things frequently that are different and see what people think. And again, it isn't always going to be a beer that maybe works. So we take a beer, we make about 21 kegs of beer at a time. It's a fairly small batch size. For us, it's kind of big. You know, if I make 21 kegs of beer and it turns out to be a dud that people don't want to drink, that's a lot of beer that I've got to then dispose of and a lot of money down the drain for a small company. So when we make a new beer, we've got to be, you know, we've got to make sure that we're taking a chance in the right way, that it's got to be something that's going to be a bit different. It's got to be something that's got something kind of Metalman about it, that we're using something in a way that maybe other people are not using, or we're using an ingredient that isn't out there already, like maybe our ginger beer, or we've got a lager with Sriracha Ace, a red lager with Sriracha Ace fermenting at the moment, something a little bit different. But, you know, 21 kegs of beer, it's like testing in prod. It's kind of scary for us, so we want to make sure we're going about it the right way. It works. For the most part, it seems to work. We want to take chances, but you also have to be practical and businesslike about it and say, I need to be able to sell this beer. People need to enjoy it. So how are we making sure each time that the recipes that we're doing are the right kinds of recipes? So getting feedback from people, really, really important. We're always open to feedback. We like to hear what people think about our beer. So shout it or tell me later. Always happy to hear it. And I suppose that's kind of as much. Oh, somebody wants to cancel their chips. I thought that was a question, but I don't think it's for me. So I suppose really that's as much as I had really sort of prepared to talk about for tonight. From moving from that sort of environment to a single person environment, I would say the biggest things that I learned were hold yourself accountable to things, because while you've got that structure around you in a big environment, you don't have it in your own business when the buck stops with you, and you don't get anything done unless you've got those deadlines around you. And the other thing then is people count. As a small business owner, it's really easy to think when you start out, I can do that. And then as a result, you think, I should do it because I'm able to do it, rather than paying somebody else to do it for me. But there is a massive gulf between what you should do and what you can do. And learning the difference between those two is really important. I can drive around and deliver my beer, but it's a monumentally bad idea in terms of developing my business if all I ever do is drive my beer around in a van, because otherwise we're not going to grow, we're not going to hire people, we're not going to be able to pay our staff, and the business isn't going to go anywhere. So learning the difference between those things without having anybody there to tell you what is and what isn't a good way to do it, in the same way that a manager might develop you in a more structured environment, was a lesson that it took me about a year to figure out. But I think we're kind of getting there. We've got a good team now. Having people behind you to help you build your product and support what you're doing and make great beer is the most important thing. Having people who are excited about what they're doing, who feel a sense of ownership and who are interested in beer, want to take chances, like the ingredients, like the end result. It's a massively social thing, so it's a nice thing to be involved in. That makes a massive difference. And I think when it comes down to it, we could make the best beer in the world, but unless we have people who are drinking it and telling other people about it, we don't have the same sort of budgets that Heineken or Diageo might have to be able to say, you should drink this beer because it's the beer you want to drink. So unless we can get our message out there with the people who are drinking our beer through the people who are making the beer, I think that's a hugely important thing for us. And I think Colin will probably agree with this as well. The staff behind any bar for us are so important in terms of whether our beer will actually get sold. Because if your staff behind your bar are not really that interested in what they're selling, nothing sells except the stuff that has global advertising. You hear stories. I know that somebody had told me once that they went into a bar, the bar staff didn't know who they were, and he heard somebody order his beer, and the bar staff said, "Why are you drinking that rubbish?" So there is a hugely impactful lesson there, that you're as good as the person down the chain from you in terms of how your beer is presented to people. So I think to be successful in a small business, you've got to really care about where your beer is ending up and how it's getting there. And again, I think people are probably really important.